Glad you've joined us this afternoon, and those online that are joining us from different places around the world. Starting off a brand new sermon series for the month of October called Sticks and Stones. And while you may think, oh yeah, sticks and stones, it's that whole break your bones thing, it has nothing to do with that. We're actually going to talk about some great stories from the Old Testament that remind us of the power of sticks and stones to impact our lives. And today we're going to kick off looking at a story that comes... Well, let me give you a little bit of the backstory. It's the story of the children of Israel as they stand at the edge of the Jordan River, ready to cross over into the Promised Land. And if you're familiar with the story, you remember some things. And if you're not, let me kind of tell you. This is the group that Moses has gone to Egypt, back to Egypt, and has worked with the Pharaoh and has finally got their release, and they've gone to the desert. And it's all started off by them being trapped as they come to the Red Sea. There's the sea in front of them, there's mountain ranges on either side, and behind them is this huge Egyptian army that's barreling down on them. At that moment, they ask for God to do something, and God does this miraculous miracle. He parts the sea. He puts the water back and lets them cross over to that thing. And so this is the story that kind of is at the end of that, and the story comes after 40 years. 40 years it's taken them for a trip that really should have only taken them a few weeks. And if you know the story, there's a lot of backstory about why that is and kind of the process that goes on and just the trials and they're learning about trusting God and having faith. And not only has it taken them 40 years for this should have been a short trip, out of more than 1 million of them that started this trip, there are only 2 people left out of all that more than 1 million that are still from that original group. All those people have passed away. And maybe here this afternoon, those things kind of make a little sense to you in the sense that maybe today's your first day back into a church after being sort of wandering for a while. Or maybe you feel like that, my life should have been a fairly short trip. I had a quick plan, a quick direction of where it was going to go, and it just seems like I've gone around and around and around like they did. Or maybe you feel like, it seemed like there was more with me before, and now it just seems like it's me. I'm the only one that's sort of left. And that's where they find themselves, this sort of different group that stands at the edge of that river. And on top of that, one of the things that's happened over these 40 years is they've had a lot of miracles, so many miracles that they've become common for them. They had to trust God with the parting the Red Sea. They have to trust God here as they cross the Jordan River. But God has provided them with food as they've traveled around the desert, this thing called manna. And if you remember much about the story, that the word in the original language simply means, what is it? They see the stuff and they go, what is it? And I don't know, how many of you ever eaten a kind of a meal or some kind of food and you go, what is this? It's kind of this weird stuff. Well, and for 40 years, God has provided that every day, except get the Friday, they get a double portion, so on Sabbath, they don't have to go out and collect it, but then Sunday it starts over again, and all this time they keep having this food provided. And there are times when God has to provide for them water because they're out in the desert. And He provides the water. And for them, miracles have become common. And here's the problem with that. When we come to rely on the miraculous, we expect it. And we forget the miraculous part of it. They did, and I think sometimes we do as well. Because I'm going to guess that there's nobody in this room this afternoon that has ever prayed this prayer. God, keep the earth on its axis. Keep the earth in the right orbit. Nobody here has ever prayed that, right? But think about it for a moment. It's pretty miraculous that our planet always stays at just the right position, isn't it? Always stays at just the right angle. And if you talk to somebody who's really smart and knows all this kind of stuff, they will tell you that just like a 1 degree difference, just a little bit of a twist in that thing, nobody would be here. A very miraculous thing, but we kind of take it for granted because, well, it's always happened. Nobody here ever prays for the sun to come up tomorrow morning. You don't wake up when it's dark and you think, I'm going to pray, make sure the sun comes up. It just happens. And so we have that same kind of feeling of sometimes the miraculous, the things that we could sort of appreciate, they just kind of fall by the wayside. And God has been this steady. God's been steady through this, even though they haven't. And there's this great statement that Paul writes to his sidekick Timothy over in 2 Timothy, and he says these words. Timothy, listen, tell the people this. If we've died with Him, that is, if we've kind of pushed back away from all the pull of what this life has, if we've sort of laid that down in front of God and we've died to it, we'll also live with him. That's a positive. We give up something, but we gain something. If we endure, the challenge to endure, if we do that, we shall reign with him. So positives, we kind of a negative now, but a big payoff later. But then he switches up and says, if we deny and disown and reject him, he'll also do that to us. He'll deny, disown, and reject us. So we got the good trade-off, and then we got this sort of, if we do it, he does it. But then he makes a twist here. If we are faithless, that is, we do not believe and are untrue to him, he remains true. That is, faithful to his word and his righteous character. For, Paul writes, he cannot deny himself. And it's this interesting twist that he puts there that makes sense when you think about this story, because while they had been faithful, unfaithful, all over, God has been this one constant in their life for this 40-year journey. It isn't about whether we're faithful or not, that God cannot do anything but be faithful. And that's what I find. In fact, Paul ends up by saying, listen, Timothy, remind the people of these facts. That there is there's a choice we make. But there's a payoff to it. We die to ourselves, but we'll get a chance to live. We endure stuff, but we'll get a chance to reign. If we disown, he's going to step back and disown. But even if we're unfaithful, he stays faithful through all those things. And the last part of the story is, now after all the losses and the lessons, they stand ready at the bank of this river to enter into the promised land. They finally have the payoff they've been after for this 40 years. And that's where we're going to pick up the story. That's where we're going to figure out why in the world we have this pile of rocks. That's where we're going to find out how come you have this rock. And again, if you don't have a rock in your hand, look around. There's some rocks spread around different seats. Get a rock for me. Get a rock for you. We're going to come to it in just a moment, all right? So have that ready. But before we go any farther, I'm going to invite you just to bow your heads and let's pray one more time this afternoon, okay? God, it's so easy. It's so easy for us. It is so easy for me to forget. To let the cares, the worries, the concerns of life just sort of push you to the side. And sometimes those things get so big that they block you out. And I just pray this afternoon that you remind me that you are always there, that you are always faithful, that you're always steady. And remind myself again that when things get too big, to have something that reminds me to pull me back, remind you that you are bigger than any of those things. And so just speak through us this afternoon through your word and through the words I have. In your name, amen. We're going to pick up the story over in Joshua chapter 4 and begin in verse 4. And it says this: Joshua chose one man from each tribe. There were 12 different groups of Israelites, 12 different tribes there. And so he gets one guy from each of the tribes, and he tells them, come on, guys, let's have this little discussion. Let's get together. And he says to this, go out into the river where the ark of the Lord your God is. Now, they have come to the river. God has parted the river open. He has stopped the water. The ark has gone out. These guys are now in the middle of the river, the dry bed, and they're standing there kind of as a presence to sort of keep the water back, and everybody's going across. And so Joshua says, go in there and grab some rocks out from where this ark's at. And each of you is to bring back one rock, each one for the tribe, and to carry it on his shoulder. So it's a big enough rock. It's not a little rock like you got today, because I thought if I put these kind of rocks in your chairs, you'd have to sit on it or kind of move it around or put it in your lap, and everybody would be uncomfortable today. But these are significant rocks. These are enough that people would go, oh, this is something more than just a little pile of stones. This is some rocks. And he says to them, these rocks are going to be this sign, this reminder, this memorial among you. And it's this idea of this word remind. It's a simple verb which means to cause us to think of something. Cause us to think of something. It's those lists. You go to the grocery store, you take a list. Anybody else take a list? I used to go to the grocery store, Lloyd, say, hey, on your way home, honey, pick up these 3 items. So what is it? Milk, bread. And I can never remember. I have 3 things. How hard is it to remember 3 things, right? And the answer is sometimes kind of hard, right? So now I've taken just writing down a list, because then all I have to do is remember where I put the list versus the three things on the list, But it's that reminder, and any kind of reminder is simply for us that will go, hey, oh yeah, that's right. See, the problem isn't that we can forget. We all do. And it's normal for us to forget. The problem, and catch this, the problem is when we forget what God has done, that does to us. The problem is when we forget what God has done, what that forgetting does to us, the impact it does, the effect it has on our lives. Now, Joshua's going to tell these guys to get this pile of rocks, to put them up and to do some things, to be this memory thing. And here's the problem. We give our present doubts power over our past certainties. We give our present doubts over our past certainties. I'm guessing for a lot of us here today, that is a true statement. Something big comes up, the boss calls you into the office and he never calls you into the office. And that can't be a good thing because when anybody goes in the office, they don't come out happy. Or, you get up in the morning and you turn the key in your car and there's nothing. And you go, oh no, I had so much planned today and I'm running late already. And this whole thing. And our present doubts get this power over our past certainties. And so, he says to us, listen, in the future, your children will ask you, what do these rocks mean to you? You're going to make this pile, and so that in the future, your kids are going to come along and say, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, what gives you this pile of rocks? That looks weird. What's the story behind it? And there's a great lesson for us in there. In fact, Martin Luther King Jr. has this great line that goes along with it. He said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. That's why I believe God says, have this pile of rocks, have this reminder, so that you don't forget the things that matter, because we'll lose that life. So it's this reminder that things mattered and things had different back then. So he says, tell your kids that the water stopped flowing in the Jordan when the Ark of the Agreement with the Lord crossed the river. These rocks will always remind the Israelites of this. And so he says, listen, they carried these rocks, these 12 rocks, over to the camp they were going to have that night. They put them up there. This is the place for the rocks. This is the pile that will be the reminder for us. But Joshua also put 12 rocks in the middle of the Jordan River. Now the question is, we got the 12 rocks on land, so when you're walking along, you see that with your kids, you see it yourself, and you go, oh, yeah, that's right. That's when God did that thing. Yeah, I got that. But he puts these rocks in the river. And the question is, why would he put rocks in the river? Because when would you see the rocks? There's only 2 times when you would see those rocks. One would be if you were going to look for the place exactly along the riverbank. Where are those rocks? Oh, right here's the spot, because I can see the rocks underneath the water. The other time you would see those rocks is when there was a drought, when the water got low, and they would rise up to remind you again. This is the place that God did something. This is the place that God showed up. And he said, listen, those rocks are still there today. And the reality is, we need the exact same thing in our lives. What we need is something unmovable in an ever-moving world. We need a reminder. Something that when we see it, it communicates to us, that's right, that's the time that God showed up. And if you were to come to my office, you would see I got a bunch of artifacts and things I've collected from traveling different places and doing different things. But you would see a couple of different things if you came. In fact, I had somebody in my office this morning, and they saw this trophy, and they pulled it off my shelf. It's missing the club. It's not a very expensive trophy. But he looked at it and he said, dude, you must be a pretty good golfer. And I said, read it what it says. And he says, well, it says third flight, first place, 1994 Dare to Care. He said, you got to be a pretty good golfer. To which I said, I'm a lousy golfer. And I said, let me tell you why I have this cheap trophy that I've kept around since 1994. 20 years I've kept this around. And there's a reason for that. Because this trophy reminds me that on that day, I still was a lousy golfer, by the way. But I was fortunate to be with 3 other guys who were really good golfers. And they invited me to play in this tournament, and I said, I'm a really lousy golfer. And they said, no problem, we're really good, we'll take care of you. It was a best of ball tournament. If you're not familiar with that, it simply means everybody hits their ball, and whoever goes the farthest and the straightest, that's the ball you take. The only rules are you have to take at least 2 hits of every player. That's where I come in, right? Truthfulness, I want you to know that day they took 3 of my hits. One of them was a putt that anybody could have made, and I was just the first one of any of them to take the shot, and I went in, so they took that one as well. But here's the reason I keep this cheap memento that looks great because it says first place, but is not really first place about me. It's about the fact of who I was linked up that day. It was about the fact that it wasn't about how good of a player I am, it was about who had been surrounded me. And for me, every time I see this, it reminds me that in my experience with God, it's not about whether I come in first place, or whether I'm good at all the stuff, or whether I come through. It's in fact, in God's eyes, I'm on a first place team, because He's always there for me. So I keep this little trophy, it's up on my shelf, and you'll see it again come in my office, because it's that reminder, it's those mementos, it's that thing that says, yeah, that's right, Mike. On that day, because of the group, the people that took you in, you were first place. You'd also see on my desk, you'd see all these pictures. You'd see pictures of Lori at different stages of life. You see my boys at different ages of life. And you would also see this card that's stuck on the back of my desk. And it's got these 2 handsome-looking guys. Can you guys see it in the back there? If you can, it's these kids all dressed up pretty nice. And at the bottom it has a statement. It says, some days are hopscotch kind of days. Some days are waiting to get nailed at dodgeball kind of days. I hope today is that hopscotch kind. And it's my buddy, my best friend, who wrote, thanks for lunch, bud. Hope your stress cools, Walt. And that card sits in my office because it was at a period of life that I think I was out in California for something. We had a chance to have some lunch together and just kind of talk about how things were going in life and some of the struggles. And I've kept that card because it reminds me of that in that period of time, that God put somebody in my life that I needed at that moment just to kind of listen to me and kind of say, I understand. I know what you're going through. And I'm thinking about you. And so whether maybe today you're having a hopscotch kind of day, or maybe today you're having one of those get hit in the head with a dodgeball kind of days, but to know that somebody at least knows those things. And for me, they're just like this pile of rocks. For me, it's just like this rock that you hold in your hand, that it can be a reminder, a memory of something. That when we see it, it communicates more than just a trophy, more than just a picture. It communicates that God was active, that God was present. This was a statement I shared with you a couple weeks ago. Don't doubt in the dark what was confirmed in the light. And this statement has been with me for probably 25 plus years, and it's a statement that has gotten me through a lot of dark moments in life, struggles in life. You hit one of those walls where it seems like, where's God? Nothing's working out like I thought it was going to work out. This has gone bad, that's gone bad, everything's not working out, and how come I can't and it won't? And I heard this years ago, and it has stuck with me that in those moments of darkness, what I need to do is remember the lights, those places where God shows up, where those piles of rocks are in my life. I'd say, I know for sure right here, God was there. I know at this point in life, God was here. And over here, at this stage of life, I remember this is what God did. And while I'm over here right now and I don't have a pile of rocks, I don't have any clear evidence at this moment, what I do have is reminders of when God was present, when God was active, when God did something. And thus I can be not just hopeful, but assured that even today. See, our faith on some days is an act of our will, not of our emotions. Some of those days, it is simply saying, I'm going to make this decision. I maybe don't feel like it. I don't feel like God's here. I don't really feel like engaging, but it's going to be an act of my will today because I need to get through this day. And to do that, sometimes we need those reminders, those things that jump out in our lives. And so here's a very practical point. All of us, what we need to do is learn to talk to ourselves rather than listening to ourselves. Now, I'm not talking of that kind of talk that sometimes happens, you know. I don't mean talk to yourself where people go, what's up with him, what's up with her, talking to himself. I've always thought if you had some of those challenges in life, some of those mental challenges, you ought to get yourself a little Bluetooth headphone. Because, if you see somebody in the city walking down, they got a Bluetooth, they can be talking about anything, and you go, oh, they're on the phone, right? You see the person who's walking along, they don't have anything on their head, don't have any phones, you go, no, what's going on, right? But you just get a Bluetooth. I mean, that'd be a great thing to give those people, because then everything looks fine. We accept them for who they are because they're on the phone talking to somebody. And I'm not talking about those kind of talk, but what I'm saying is there are moments that instead of listening to yourself, you need to talk to yourself. Because some of you understand that when you listen to yourself, it just gets worse and worse and worse, right? And there are times when I talk to myself. I don't talk out loud normally, but I talk to myself, and here's what I typically say. Hey, knucklehead, pay attention here. Don't be so stupid. Think about this, Think about, what's going on, and don't get kind of caught up in that negativity or caught up in that doubt, or remind yourself again, God was here. God was here. God was here. And it's not about my faithfulness, because even when I'm unfaithful, God is always, always, always faithful. That He always shows up. That He's always consistent. See, there's this great power, the power of remembering and the power of thanksgiving. And when I say power of thanksgiving, I'm not talking about the meal that we're like 6 weeks away. One of my favorite holidays of all time. I don't know, you guys like Thanksgiving? Yeah, right? I'd say, yeah, all right. Great, one of the great holidays. It's the permission to eat as much as you want and then eat even more than what you want because it's Thanksgiving, right? Growing up in my house, it's always, big meals. You kind of go sit in front of the TV because that's always a good way to burn off those calories. Watch a little football, some team gets blown out, and then it's dessert time. Anybody want dessert? That's the question. Anybody ready for dessert? And everybody's like, yeah. Because you don't want to put off dessert, right? So you go and you have all these pies and all the different stuff. And it's this great celebration. And our problem is that not that we have this great celebration that we overeat and overindulge and overdo stuff. It's that we don't practice the idea of giving thanks on a regular basis. That we don't recognize the power of remembering. The power of reminding ourselves that, yeah, that's right, God was there. And yeah, that's right, that God can be here at the same time. We forget, right? And that's normal. That's why we need reminders. Forgetfulness is sort of wired in us. And now sometimes you get a little older, you start thinking, oh, I'm getting more forgetful. The reality is everybody forgets. Lori and I have a son. He's been forgetful for years. He always says, oh, I'm just really not good at remembering stuff. He kind of I think he talks about, and I think it's a reality. I remember the story I heard. These two ladies they'd been friends for like 50 years. They were met in their 30s, now they're in their 80s, and they were they still, even to this day, had played cards a couple times a week. And so they're in this retirement home, and they've again been friends for all this time, and they're playing cards this one day, and this one lady looks at the other one and says, we have known each other a long time, a lot of years, and I apologize. Can you tell me what your name is? And the other lady just glares at her. Just kind of gives her one of those looks that all of us have seen the look like, really, And she kind of glares at her for like 3 minutes, just gives that. So she finally says, how soon do you need to know? Because, it's normal, right? That's again why and I believe it's why God says, put these pile of rocks, not just for them, but even for us. Because we all need reminders. Because the truth of the matter is, tomorrow is uncertain, right? And the greater truth is this. Tomorrow's always been uncertain. And the worry about tomorrow and the concern about it can get piled up. But that's why we need these reminders that says, you know what? That's right. God was here, and he did something miraculous, and God is still here, even though I may not be recognizing what's going on. And here's the cool thing. When our remembering faith intersects with God's faithfulness, it causes our faith to grow. Because we're remembering something, and it's crossing with the fact that what we're remembering is that God is faithful, and that causes us to say, yeah, that's right, and because it's right, this is what I can do. So here's what I want you to do this afternoon. I want you to take that rock, get in your hands. Please. I'll be nice this afternoon. Please. All right? Thank you. And I want you just to simply look at that rock for just a moment. And I want you to think about the one time when you were clear that God was real, that God was there, that God was active in your life, all right? I'll give you a couple seconds. Think about that moment when God was real, that God was active. It was one of those you can't miss. This is a God thing. This is a God moment. And I know for sure right now, at that moment, this was it. All right, everybody kind of get that in your mind, get an idea? Right. I want you to look at that rock and have that rock remind you of that, because here's my second question. How long has it been since you thought about that event? That you knew for sure that God was there, that God was present? And secondly, do you have anything that reminds you of that moment when you were clear? Because knowing something and remembering it are two different things, right? Ask any guy when it gets to be anniversaries or birthdays, right? Knowing something and remembering it are, that's right. But what if? What if you had those reminders, those mementos, those pieces that were part of your life, part of the fabric, part of where you would see them regularly, that communicate to you something that would only make sense to you? That I'm not alone. That I'm better than than I really am, not because of me, but because of him. When you come to those moments of doubt, when you come to those moments that I'm not sure where you're at, God. Can't see you. Can't feel you. It just seems dark right at this moment. I would encourage you to find some kind of reminders. It will remind you again that because he was here, because he was there, I have every reason to believe, not just assume, but to believe that even right now, he's here. Because it's not how I feel at this moment. It's an act of my will to believe because I've seen him. I know the pile of rocks, and I know what it's reminded me of. With that in mind, I remind you again that when life is uncertain, God is not. That is what Paul wrote to Timothy when he said, we can deny him and he'll deny us, but we can be unfaithful. He will always be faithful. We need to be reminded that God is always consistent and always regular. With that in mind, I invite you to take out that card we talked about earlier, this Connect card on the back. There's these next steps. Every week we like to give people an opportunity to take a next step, and so maybe your next step this week is simply to remind myself in my dark moments of God's light moments. Maybe that's the thing. You've got to kind of come up with some tool, whether taking this rock that you get today home and putting it someplace, or whether you put something else around your house, or put something else around your apartment, or put something else around your office or your car that will remind you. Maybe your next step today is that when you're fearful, to look back to God's presence in my life. That don't let the moment overwhelm you. If you can't see something going forward, look back to where you've been clear. Maybe your next step today is to begin to challenge your thoughts, your feelings with God's reality. And again, to have some piles that are there to remember. They're there to remind you that God is there, always has been, and always will be.